All right, the next thing we're going to talk about are some rules that apply to lines and how we use them in our drawings. So, um, some of these rules are kind of hard to follow, so just, pay attention. We're learning these rules to help us so that we can communicate a little bit more effectively. First one, hidden lines represent edges and boundaries that can't be seen. We know that, okay? When we create those hidden lines, the sizing between the dashes and the spaces is not necessarily, it has to be so many millimeters and so many this. It just depends on the scale of what you're doing, okay? So realize if I have a bigger feature, then these dashes are probably going to be bigger. If I have a smaller feature, then the dashes are going to be smaller. It's all relative scale. We want to make sure that our hidden lines always begin and end in a dash. So like this example up here, we've ended in a dash. Again, we've ended in a dash right there. The only time that you're going to see it a little bit differently, like in this example here or here, is when that visible piece ends at a parallel. So we'll talk about more examples of that later on. Our dashes should join at corners, so you see the two different corners there and how the dashes kind of intersect. We don't leave a space right here, okay? We make sure that those dashes line up right there. Next set of rules we'll talk about are center lines. So again, center lines represent our axes of symmetry, okay? We need to show them anytime we have cylindrical shapes. So whether we have a circle like here, or this, when I see something like this, that's not a rectangle. That's actually a cylinder, and instead of looking at it this way, you're looking at it from the side. So when you take your soup can and you hold it up to the side, it's really going to look like a rectangle. But because it has that horizontal line through it, that's a center line, that tells me that that's not a rectangle. That's really a cylinder flipped over on its side. We're also going to use center lines to indicate circles of centers or paths of motion. So over here on the left, this is called a circle of centers, sometimes also referred to as a bolt circle. So that tells me that the distance out here to this center is the same between this center line and this one for all four of those holes. Over here on the right, that shows me that obviously there's a pivot point right here, and then as this pivot point works, this piece would come and follow along that path. So there's your path of motion. When we create the center lines, we want them to start and end with the long dashes. So either one of those is correct. The one on the left is the one you probably see most often, where the short dashes cross in the center, but sometimes it looks like the picture on the right where the long dashes cross in the center. Either way, we want it to be symmetrical. That's the whole point with center lines. We want them to look symmetrical. In this example, our center lines should intersect by crossing either the long or the short dashes. Okay, I just said that. You don't want to have them any other way. This one's kind of a hard one to get the hang of, but our center lines should extend a little bit beyond the edge of the object or the feature. So on the left, that's correct. What we're talking about is this little distance right here. That is what we want. We do not want, over here is incorrect, where that center line stops. And the reason we don't want it like that is we don't want somebody to look at this drawing and think, is this right here, is that a center line or is that a visible line? So that's a little bit different. Even though there's a difference in the line weight between a center line and a visible line, we still want to go ahead and take those center lines and extend beyond the feature. So we could have taken this line right here and stopped it right there, would have been acceptable, or we have extended it on. We just don't want it to stop right there at the intersection with that visible line. The fourth rule is that center lines may be connected within a single view. So here happens to be one view where we have multiple center lines, and it's okay that this one right here connects to this one right here. What we don't want is for this center line to extend across maybe into our right side view over here. So center lines should not extend through the space between views. The next set of rules will be for phantom lines. Okay, again, those are used to indicate adjacent positions or related parts. Here's just some examples on how to use phantom lines. Okay, there's kind of a repeated detail in this particular spring here. So instead of copying and pasting it a whole bunch of times, they've just used phantom lines to say that, hey, this pattern continues all the way over here to the other edge. Typically, we also use phantom lines to show maybe a change in surface direction because of fillets or rounds. And when I talk about fillets and rounds, I'm talking about these shapes right here on the edge of this particular box. So you can see we've used some phantom lines around that edge. Again, here's another one to show back to that example. We've got a center line right here that's showing this path of motion, but then when this pivot goes ahead and makes it all the way down here, this is a phantom line to show me where this part would sit whenever it has finished its movement. So phantom lines should always start and end with the long dashes. So make sure that you start and end with the long dashes. The next set is break lines. So here's an example of how you might see a break line used. Basically that just means we got lazy and maybe this part is really long, and so to play with the scale on our drawing we've just shown a break line here just to say that this part continues and it continues, and eventually on the other end it looks like that. So there's two different types of break lines. You've got one here that's kind of a short break line where you see the arcs. If you have longer break lines, you may see one that looks like this. It kind of looks like a heartbeat. Jog line is sometimes what that one is referred to. So two different types, they're both break lines. The most important part of this lecture talks about line precedence, and we saw it back in a previous example where we had a hole on top of a hole, and one hole was visible from the top down and then the other hole was not, and that's where line precedence comes into play. If two lines occur in the exact same place, the line that is considered to be the least important we omit. So the most important lines we talk about are our cutting plane lines, and we really won't have any examples of those until later on in the semester. So you can kind of ignore that one for right now. The most important ones to realize are that visible lines are more important than hidden lines. So if we have a visible hole and back behind it maybe a hidden hole, we're going to show the visible hole. And then hidden lines beat center lines. So the most important is visible, then hidden, then center. So if you have one of those on top of the other, we're going to show a visible line rather than a hidden line. Or if we have a visible line and a center line lapping over top of each other, we're going to show it as the visible line.